Gracie and I are at the coal mines today, and what we're searching for is William Thompson's coal hole. William Thompson was a 21-year-old shoemaker who was sentenced to life in 1841 for shop breaking. He was originally sent to Jericho in the Midlands of Tasmania, but due to escaping the convict station there, he was sentenced to hard labour in chains at the coal mines. William arrived at the coal mines in January of 1842 and stayed until the 23rd of September 1844. He related his convict period to a local historian named Beattie in 1900. These recollections were turned into a book called The Career of William Thompson, Convict, and it was edited by Julia Clark. Just before we start looking for which shaft that William worked at down here, or coal hole as he calls it, I want to say what a great book it is. I use it quite a lot for my research down here, as it gives me a good picture of what was on the ground at the time. There are some parts of the book where William's memory isn't quite correct. It's quite a while since he was down here and when he did his recollections of his time here, so that's totally understandable. There's a few other things in the book there where the editing makes some comments in the footnotes which I don't always agree with, but overall it's a great book. I'm not sure if it's in print anymore. I've seen some copies on eBay. If you're after the book, maybe contact Port Arthur, as they're the one who published the book, and maybe they still have copies in the bookstore down there. So let's head off and see if we can find out where William Thompson's coal hole is. The editor of the book provides a nice map from 1842 of where she believes Bill was working. I've marked the shaft to make it a little bit clearer with a big red dot. You can see it there in the top right hand corner of your screen. Gracie and I are now at the shaft shown on the map, and William recollects that this shaft is on top of the hill near the signal station and was called the Old Shaft or Womsey Shaft. At the mouth of the pit was the Womsey or pump, which was always kept going, about 8 men or more being kept on the job. The Womsey, or as the editor corrects it in the book, Wimsey, W-I-M-S-E-Y, but I'll just call it the pump, was located above the shafts to pump the water out of the shafts. It was manually pumped by the convicts operating a large wheel, and these shafts at the coal mines were notorious for flooding. I'm now on the other side of the shaft, beside where Gracie was sitting, and it's quite a wide shaft compared to some of the other convict shafts here. Now that may have been caused by when they first dynamited this closed, but it's also due to the banks of the shaft being sand, and there has been a lot of erosion around this area here, so this has made the shaft bigger than it originally was. Now we're just going to pop over and have a look at this side of the platform, and you can see down here that there is a lot of erosion, and it's difficult to see where the platform originally started on this side. It has fallen down. I can see at least probably 2 metres of soil that's come off the bank, but possibly round the back there is where you see the edge was that would have gone down this side of the shaft. That's also over there. It's all covered with sand and bracken. Now let's have a look at the rear, and you can see where my rope begins over there. I believe that's an approximate area dimension of where the shaft was. There's large rocks that have all fallen down here, but you can see a bank travelling along there where my rope travels, and it continues along here, and this is the last really clear spot you can see up in this area here of where the bank was, just below that pink marker. That gives me 15 metres to there, and then if I travel down this rope here, along here, there is some erosion here at the bottom of the tree here, but it gets to about this point here on the other side of the shaft, and that gives me 11 metres. So there we have a platform 15 by 11, though I do suspect this platform was a lot bigger, and I'll get back to that later in the video. So how do we know that the WAMSI, or pumping apparatus, was located at this shaft? Well, luckily an artist called Owen Stanley was down here in January of 1841, and he did a sketching of this shaft. And if you have a look at this sketching now, you can see in the middle there are two large wheels, the one on the left being operated by convicts. There's nobody on the right, and there's another wheel in the background as well. In the foreground you can see a convict pushing a small cart up a tramway. Owen does take a little artistic license here. The tracks are curving round to the left, which wasn't the case because these tracks made here are all timber of she oak, 3 metres long, so I don't think you could curve them in any manner whatsoever. I believe he's just made that so the shaft apparatus, the stuff that went over the shaft itself, the frames and all that to hold the pulleys and that, would have taken away the picture of where the two wheels were located there. But anyway, by looking at that, we know that this area here is where those two large wheels, the one on the left is the winding gear to raise and lower the convicts into the pit, as well as to raise the coal out of the pit, and the one on the right, I expect, is the pumping apparatus. So we know that at this area here, where Gracie's sitting there, was the winding gear and pumping gear. So from Owen Stanley's drawing we can tell that a winding gear and pumping gear was located here at this platform, and that's the size of platform that would need to accommodate such equipment. We know that that drawing was taken at this location because it's the only shaft round here that does fit the terrain that's located. William gives us some further information about the site. He says, then there was a windlass, 8 men at the windlass, 4 on each side, arrangement for hoisting the coal, a full box going up and an empty one going down. A platform was built to the mouth of the shaft, and a short section of double tram ran to the screen. Now that windlass was one of those big wheels that you saw in Owen Stanley's drawing, the other one being the pumping wheel. I have yet to see any plan drawing apart from Owen Stanley's drawing of the pumping apparatus, nor is there any plans or drawings of the winding machine that was situated beside it. Now, we don't know whether these machines were made at Port Arthur, whether they're made at Hobart, or whether they were shipped out from England, or could have even been made at the coal mines itself. What I have found on the internet is this picture. I think it gives you some idea of what it is, but again I don't know the actual size of the machines that will work down here. The pumping machine was operated by 8 men or more according to William, while the winding apparatus only had 8 men on it. Now whether those two wheels were different, I don't know. They could have just had an extended handle type situation for the pumping device as opposed to the winding device. What's important though is William also gives us a very important clue as to which coal hole he worked at when he says that a short section of double tram ran to the screen. So let's travel down our tramway and just have a look at the length of it and see if it is William's short tramway. So it goes under those logs there on the other side of the big tree. There is some brick rubble here. That was when the private firms took over later and used an engine mount up here. I've done a video on this area, so you can have a look at that there if you're interested. Now where Gracie's patiently sitting there, our tramway unfortunately has been covered by a large tree that has fallen since we've been up here filming. Luckily Gracie wasn't sitting there when that happened, but what we'll need to do now is go on the other side of that and continue where the tramway is. Now the tramway continues on the other side of the tree where Gracie's sitting now, and it heads down in that direction there to Plunket Point. There is a mine shaft here in our way, so we're just going to go around the other side of that. This mine shaft wasn't here when the convicts were using this tramway, because obviously you wouldn't have a tramway going over the top of a mine shaft. And we'll travel down the other side of the mine shaft, along the tramway to where Gracie's patiently sitting there, and that is the bulkhead. Where Gracie's sitting there is the lip of the bulkhead, and from this point here all the way back to our shaft is approximately 55 metres. So that is a very long tramway, not the short tramway that William seemed to describe in the book. In fact, this is the longest tramway that I know that links the shaft up to the bulkhead at the coal mines. Now at this point here, the 90 kilo carts would have stopped where Gracie was, and they would have had a screen here, and then at this point the coal would have been tipped onto the screen, a wooden screen. The bigger pieces would have stayed on top, the smaller pieces fallen through the bottom, and then that screen would have been tipped into a 1 tonne coal cart which would have been sitting here, and then when they filled that up, the convicts would have pushed it down this tramway here all the way down to Plunket Point. It's not the tramway that goes between the main shaft and Plunket Point where you walk on as a tourist. It was an earlier tramway. William says in his recollections that the shaft is on the top of the hill near the signal station. The signal station is nowhere near this shaft. In fact, it is one of the earlier convicts pits that is the furthest away from the signal station. William also related that when he descended into the shaft, you have your back to the semaphore station. Now, the semaphore station is not behind me. In fact, the main shaft isn't behind me. I'm even north of the main shaft, but the signal station is over in that direction, not behind me here. And even if he was lowered on that side, which I don't believe he was, then the signal station obviously would not be behind him. The editor of the book says at this point that William's recollections are incorrect, and the semaphore station was located behind the old shaft, which is 200 metres plus away from here. The editor is saying that this being the new shaft, which it was, that it was nowhere near the semaphore station, and William's memory was incorrect. Well, what we'll do now is go and see if we can have a look at some other shafts and try to get a picture of whether William's memory was correct or not, and if he was working at this one or if he was working at another shaft. Just before we go heading off the bush looking at the alternative sites, I thought I'd just mention there's 3 types of shafts at the coal mines. There's a production shaft, which this one is, and then you have an air shaft and you have an exploratory shaft. Let's just start with the production shaft, and I have no mining experience whatsoever, but when looking at these shafts to tell if it was a production shaft, the first thing I have a look around is the edge of the pit and try to see where there is more dark colour of coal. And where Gracie is over on that side where the platform was, you really don't see much coal at all. But on the opposite side down here, you can see the darker bank. Then I look for the tramway, and here it is very obvious where the tramway is. It travels down under those logs, down 60 metres odd to where the bulkhead is. Sometimes the tramways are only single track. This was double track, as we know. The single track sometimes can be a little bit harder to find as they have eroded away, or other parts of the mining or roads have gone over the top of them, and it makes it very difficult to work out what was happening at that site. More often than not though, down here where the convicts are working, you'd have a production and air shaft side by side. Over here behind Gracie is a production shaft, and the reason why I can tell that is if you have a look down here, you can see that this is where all the coal is, and they would have taken it out of this shaft, travelled down this way here, and on the other side of those trees there there is a bulkhead which travels down to a tramway. The shaft on this side would have been an air shaft, and over on that side there I can see a little bit of coal dust, so they may well have reached the scene because they wanted to get the air down to where the miners were. But if you look at this side where the bulkhead is, it's just plain dirt and a little bit of rocks and that's come out of the shaft. So that gives us a good idea of what a production shaft with its air shaft sitting beside it looks like. Air shafts can also be separate identities. They don't always have to be located beside a production pit. This is one such air shaft here. I know it's an air shaft because it's showing on one of those 1842 maps, so it's definitely an air shaft. This is huge, this shaft. I think it's probably the biggest, not counting the main shaft, but this is the widest shaft I've seen at the coal mines to date. You look around the edge here, we have got bits of coal, but it does not show any signs of a bulkhead, and nor does it show any signs of a tramway leading away from it. And as I said before, it is marked on the map as an air shaft. So the reason I'm showing you this one here is to let you know that they can be standalone shafts. They don't always have to be located right beside a production shaft to be an air shaft. This is an exploratory shaft. The sign down the road says it's an air shaft, but it was an exploratory shaft. They dug down 45 metres, about the same depth as our shaft A, the one we just left, and they found no coal, so they just left it as it was. One way to tell the difference between an air shaft and an exploratory shaft is by having a look around at the spoil. And here you can see the spoil around the exploratory shaft, and there is no coal whatsoever. Even looking down there a little bit, you see the hard rock that they took out of the shaft, but there isn't a single speck of coal around this shaft at all. I didn't mention this before, but where Gracie's sitting now is approximately the area of where an air tube would have been located. And this would have been some type of smaller shaft to get down to the tunnels below to feed air down. Now I know there is a tunnel below us. I don't know how big the air tube was, how wide it was. All I can guess is from what I see in the area here, and this location is infested with rabbit burrows, and the bottom of that burrow is probably 25 to 30 centimetres from the top of the soil. And I gave that a good scrape and I come across this spoil. Now there is little bits of coal there, and that tells me that this spoil here, they got down to the coal seam below. As I said, there is a tunnel below us. There's hard rock, which I wouldn't expect to find this close to the surface. It's usually sand up here for a good metre or so. But best of all, there's a bit of convict brick, which you wouldn't expect to find 25 centimetres odd under the soil, unless it was part of a spoil dump. And what I am guessing is that this air tube had a brick closing, so instead of timber, the sides of it had walls of brick which stabilised it, and the tube itself went all the way down to where the tunnel was below, allowing air to get in and working in conjunction with another air shaft that's close by here. As I mentioned before, the editor of the book has provided a great map of where this shaft is located, but there's also another map from 1842 showing where some other shafts were located around the area at the same time, which is this map here. And on this map I've labelled where this shaft here is as shaft A, and the other shafts B, C and D, Gracie and I are now going to go have a look at and see what we can find there, and if one of those locations might have been actually where William Thompson's coal hole was. Where Gracie's patiently laying is the dividing line between two shafts. And this is our site B, and on the left here I have an air shaft, and on the right of me I have a production shaft, and that's the one they would have taken the coal out of. Now behind Gracie is a platform, and I've got my rope going round the outside of this platform, and on that side there I have about 11 metres going down the southern side. At the back there on the western side I have approximately 15 metres, and on the northern side I have another 11 metres which travels down to that big tree in the distance. Now we'll just have a look here, and on this side here I've cleaned up the vegetation, but I've left most of it intact as well. Now this here is the bank. You can see here just where they cleaned the bank out, but there is a lot of erosion from the game trails, and that's why I've banked up the vegetation there and left the existing vegetation surrounding it. There's a game trail going up there. I've left that one for the wallabies to go up and down as they've decided that's the way to go. So we'll travel along the 15 metres here, and you get a bit of the idea of the bank hopefully on the film, and then come here, and this is the 15 metre mark. Now if I'd cleared this, and I run out of energy, sorry, but if I cleared this through there I could probably go another 3 or 4 metres, and I believe this would have been closer to 18-19 metres wide. So we'll travel down here. This is the northern side, and you can see here how flat it is even through there hopefully. And I come down here, and my 11 metres comes down to where this big tree is, but I really believe that it could have gone out there another 4 or 5 metres quite easily into flat ground. So if William Thompson worked at this shaft, we have the first prerequisite, and that is a site for the pumping gear as well as the winding gear. What we need now to see is if there was actual coal here, and as I said before, I believe this is a production shaft, and if we look up under here we have coal, a big mound of it, and this mound of coal is here because it was raised from this shaft, and they would have had a platform here, and then as William describes in the book, a convict would have pulled the bucket of coal out onto here and placed it onto a little cart to be taken down the tramway. I'm now located behind the production pit, and let's just have a look at the ground here and see what we've got. All tiny specks of coal, bigger bits of coal there which break up very easily compared to the shale. Another bit there, so quite obvious, and looking down there you can see even more tiny bits. So we have lots of coal, so we know this is a production site. What about a short tramway? Well, if you follow this coal line down here, and along here is our tramway. It's 7.5 metres long. It comes down to about here, and it's pushed down a little bit there, so it's not a clear edge that we'd be looking for. But here they would have had the screen at the end of the tramway, and then the convict would have dumped the 100-kilo cart of coal onto the screen. The larger pieces of coal would have sat on top, the smaller pieces fallen through, and then he would have tipped the screen into a 1-ton cart that sat below, and that 1-ton cart would have been pushed by convicts all the way down to Plunket Point. They used a different tramway, not the inclined plane that we use now to go up and down between the main shaft and Plunket Point. So we have room for the winding and pumping gear, and we have a short tramway as described by William. All we need is the final prerequisites for him to work here, and that's regards to his location to the semaphore station. In the book he says when he was lowered in the shaft, which was near the semaphore station, his back was to the semaphore station. Now if I was to be lowered into the shaft here, which is the production shaft where they would have been lowered into, my back is not to the semaphore station. It's actually behind me at the moment is the main shaft, but right up the hill. So I don't believe this was the site that William was at. So now we know he wasn't working at site B. Let's pop down to site C, where some academics have suggested that that was the shaft William Thompson was working at, and we'll have a look down there and see what we can find. Just before we head off, have a look at the size of these hunks of sandstone rocks that have been taken out of the shaft. The only platform I've seen these at, and there was sandstone as well as shale and blue metal located around most of the shafts, but I haven't seen hunks like this sitting here. And what would have happened is this stuff here would have been taken, split up a little bit more, and then taken down to the settlement and used for building material, whether it be fill or dressed up a little bit and used as blocks in the sandstone buildings. Now, Gracie and I are at site C, which is very close to site B, and this has been suggested by some academics as possibly being William Thompson's coal hole. So we'll have a look around and see what we can see. On that far side there, which is the western side, you cannot see it under these bushes, I know, but there is a large spoil heap that's come out of the shaft. Let's just pop up there and have a look at that first and see what's going on up there. Now I'm directly behind the shaft, but I'm really having trouble finding any coal here. There's a bit of coal dust on the surface, I must admit, but most of this stuff here is spoil that's come out of the mine. And as it doesn't break easily like coal does, it's just rock. And even if we do a bit of a scrape on the surface here, you can see there is no coal. It's just rock and soil that's been taken out of the shaft. So by looking at this mound here, I can tell that there wasn't any significant amount of coal taken from the shaft. The shaft is located approximately 5 metres down there. So the spoil dump continues up the hill here, another probably 5 to 8 metres, and finishes off about here. So from this we can see quite obviously that there was no winding pumping gear located behind the shaft. Now we know there wasn't a platform located on the western side. Let's have a look down the southern side. And here again there is just a spoil dump and nothing else, nothing to show. That was a platform here. It protrudes out a little bit up to about here, but there is no coal. It's just simply moss covering small pebbles, and a lot of this would have been coming down from where that large spoil dump was on the western side behind the shaft, and the animals and the rain and that would have been pushing it down. But there's no area here which shows there would have been a large platform. Let's travel down the northern side here, and the shaft's probably 5 metres for all that, but on this side here I'm not seeing much at all. I'm seeing a tiny little bit of soil, not seeing any rocks, not seeing any coal, so the area is fairly clean, but I'm not seeing anything that would tell me that there's a platform that was situated here, and in particular a platform that was 15 metres by 11 metres wide. So just looking at this terrain here, I think we can discount this side very quickly and say that there was nothing located on this side. I'm on the southern side of the shaft, and looking around here all I can see is another spoil dump, but there doesn't seem to be, again, any coal. Look here, I've got lots of gravel, dirt, but there's no coal. Now if they were taking coal from this shaft, then the obvious place that you would find coal is this area here, because this is where the small tramway would have been to the screen if such a thing was located, and as the coal comes out of the shaft, coal gets spilt and it builds up like we saw at shaft B. So just looking through here, I'm still not seeing any significant amounts of coal, and if a tramway were to be connected to this here, it would have been connecting here to a longer tramway, and looking down here in the bush I'm not seeing any type of larger tramway connection that would have come to the screen. So I believe this here is all just spoil that's come out of the mine, and it's not somewhere that they were actually producing coal from. So what was this shaft used for if it wasn't for mining? I believe it was an air shaft. And the reason I say that is you could have had your winding gear up on this bank here, or you could have had your winding gear behind that big tree there. It didn't make any difference. But the spoil was taken out and placed on that side of the shaft, and if you were going to actually dig this as an exploratory shaft to find if there's coal, you would have kept that side of it free of spoil, and you would have had your winding gear, and then you could have extended the platform you would have had behind there to put in the pumping gear, as well as you kind of knew that up in this area you need the pumping gear. So when they dug this hole here, they had no intention of placing the pumping gear, because it was simply going to be an air shaft, and all they had to do was get down to the coal, and then the miners below in the tunnels would have linked up with this air shaft, digging the coal out as they went. So that explains why there's no coal on the surface. It was simply an air shaft, not some coal hole that William Thompson worked in. So now we know that William's coal hole wasn't located at site A, B or C. Let's pop over to site D, which isn't too far away from this air shaft, and see if we have any more luck over there. We are now at shaft D, and where Gracie's patiently laying there is the dividing line between two shafts. On my right hand side, which is the northern side, I believe is an air shaft, and on the southern side I believe is a production shaft. And around this area here is a platform almost twice the size of what the platform is that we saw at shaft B. Let's take a look at it. Let's start on the southern side, right beside the production shaft, and we'll travel up here, and this is the 11-metre side that I used at the other shafts, and it has a bit of a curve in this one here, more than the shaft B, which is more of a rectangle shape. I'm not too sure whether some of that is how it was designed, but there has been a lot of erosion, as you can see here. It's a taller bank, twice the height of shaft B. Where Gracie is now is approximately the mark where the 11-metre finishes, or would have finished on the other platform if it was a rectangle shape, but as I said, it goes in a more of a curve there. So travel round, you can see here how much has been taken out from the bank, and there's a fair bit of erosion there, but you still get a good picture of what was here. So we travel round further, and it comes across to here, and this is where things get mucked up a little bit. There's a lot of erosion here, but I also believe that this is from a lot of foot traffic. And after the convicts left, this whole coal mines was leased out to private firms, and they started mining down here. And at some time, these private firms set up a engine here, and this mound of bricks you can see here would have been a large chimney that was taking the fumes off the engine, and you can see the brick rubble here all surrounding it. So if you can imagine this wasn't here, this would give you a better picture of how big this platform was, which I'm about to show you. So we've gone the 15 metres and we're travelling down the 11 here, and it brings us up on this side of the air shaft. So there we have 15 by 11, the same size as platform B and the same size as platform A. If you have a look there, the rope's travelling along the back here. I'll just carefully walk across this here, and it travels along here. Now again, the soil has been pushed down from the hill, but after spending a day or so here, I'm convinced that this rope here, as you can see going along back there, is where the platform continues. And you can see here, even though the soil has been pushed down, that there is evidence that the platform edge has been created here. And we keep going round till about here, and there's some more erosion. So this second part of it, from the other side of the chimney to here, is approximately 25 metres long. So we come along and then it bends around here, and you can see here on this side, probably can't under all the deadfall, but this is where the area would have been cleared down to here. Now this area here, there's remains of a small structure. I think it's a fireplace. I have done a video on this area here in depth. You can see the link below, but I believe all this was a fireplace and maybe a wooden slab hut around it. And this would have been for the miners who leased the area from the government to shelter in when they were doing the mining. So we have an area big enough for both the winding machine and the pumping machine. What we need to look for next is a small tramway, as William described it. This pit here, I believe, on the southern side is the production pit. It's where the coal would have come out of. And once it was raised, there would have been a platform on this side, and then the convict would have pushed the cart down to where Gracie's patiently sitting here, which I believe is the bulkhead. And the reason why I can tell this is a bulkhead is there's some sandstone blocks left here as reinforcement. And at this point here, the cart would have been brought up to about where Gracie is, a little bit further. There's a lot of erosion here. And then the cart would have been tipped onto a screen, same as I described at the other shaft. And then that screen would have been tipped with the larger bits of coal left onto a 1 tonne cart. And that 1 tonne cart would have been pushed down that way, all the way down to Plunket Point. Again, not on the inclined plane that you walk down these days, but on the original tramway that was at the coal mines. Of course, we have to check and see the location of the semaphore station in regards to this pit here. Now I'm standing right on the edge of the pit, pretending I was on the platform, ready to be lowered down into the pit. And if I check on my GPS and turn around, and where Gracie is now behind me, a straight line between Gracie would go up the hill and it would marry up with the semaphore station. And keep in mind that by the time William got here, all this bush was cleared. The timber was used for both the mine shafts, for lighting fires, but they also cleared it to reduce the amount of escapism that was going on down the coal mines. If you were to draw a straight line between shaft A and the semaphore station, it would have been 280 metres. Shaft B would have given you 217, but from this shaft here, it's only 180 metres. Now, combine the fact that it would have had the semaphore station at William's back, with this massively large platform, and the fact that we've got an 8 metre short tramway over there, I have extreme confidence that this shaft here was William's coal hole. The question is, why did the convicts need such a big area behind their shafts compared to what the private firms used later on when the convicts left? I did some approximate calculations of how big the winding gear would have been, and in the book William Thompson says they used 8 men. Now, I kind of put the size of 8 men together and then added the size of the wheel, which I gave it about maybe half a metre, and that gave me a width of 6 metres. Now, for the pumping gear they used a lot more. William says in the book that they used 8 or more. Another convict who was down here recollects that they had 24 on the pumping gear, 12 each side. So let's meet in the middle, and using 16 men, it gives me an approximate width of 12 metres. So add that 12 metres to the 6 metres for the winding gear, and that means we need around 18 metres just for those two apparatus to work behind the shaft. Then we get to the amount of convicts that were down here. When William Thompson arrived to start his first shift in January of 1842, there was around 25 miners, that's qualified miners, located at the coal mines. There were two shafts in operation, this shaft here, where William was working, which he called the old shaft, and then you had the new shaft, which was shaft A. So let's divide those miners up between the two shafts, and that gives us around 12 per shaft. And then there were two shifts. There was 8 in the morning till around midday, 2 in the afternoon, depending on how long it took to get the coal out, and the afternoon shift would work to about 8 at night. So let's give that 6 miners per shift. Each miner had working with him at least 3 men. It could have been more, it could have been 5. It depended on what part of the tunnels they were working at. With the steeper inclines in the tunnels, they used more men to push the carts. On the flatter levels, they needed less men. So let's just say miner plus 3 men times 6, that gives us 24 convicts there. Then you had a couple of convicts who would be hooking the carts on as they reached the bottom of the shaft, and then another one up the top to unhook it, and then possibly another convict to push it down the tramway to the bulkhead, to the larger carts. You had people pushing the carts down to Plunket Point and pushing them back up. So I'm just saying 8, I don't know the number, but let's just say there are 8 convicts. They used 1 or 2 according to William. So let's say 8 working on the tramway. At the bottom of the shaft, between the levels, they had convicts pumping up water from the lower shaft to the upper shaft, and then that water was pumped up to the surface by the winding gear on the top. So they possibly had 3 or 4 convicts doing that. Up here on the surface, they had operating the winding gear and the pumping gear, another 24 convicts as we discussed before. So that gives me around 60 convicts that would have been working per shift here. And 60 convicts needed to be marshalled and sorted in a large area, and that area is where Gracie's patiently laying there in the distance, where the small chimney was. And then it'd be very important to keep the convicts separated during the shift change, so you didn't have an afternoon shift person sneaking off with a morning shift person instead of going down to do his work. So that's the reason why you had these platforms behind the shafts, so it could accommodate all the convicts that were working here at the time. Now the miners, once the convicts left, the miners that leased the area, they weren't the large numbers of personnel that the convicts had, and to operate something like this, I suspect you probably would have got away with maybe 10 people, and down below you would have had probably a miner and 2 free labourers. They also would have probably had small ponies down there. Instead of pulling the carts themselves like the convicts had to, they would have had ponies to do that. And up above here you probably have one guy here running the engine, and the second guy just running the baskets as they were being brought up by the steam engine to the small tramway, and then taking them to the bulkhead. And you probably had maybe 1, 2 guys there who were taking the coal down to Plunket Point and using horses to do that. So they didn't need to have a large area like the convicts did. In the book, William gives us another clue as to why I think he was working at shaft D, not shaft A. In the book he says, turning into a drive to the left, at the bottom of the shaft, there were 4 or 5 solitary cells cut out of solid coal with doors. They were never used while I was working there, but I believe they were previously used frequently. Now the editor of the book in the footnotes disputes this and says Thompson has misremembered their location since they were nowhere near the shaft where he was working. So let's try to figure out whether William Thompson was right and that he actually visited the solitary cells that were located underground, or the editor was right in saying that he misremembered. This map here was produced in 1837, and if you look on the top right, I've got shaft D marked. Now it doesn't quite link up with the tunnels that are on that map. It's because that shaft D wasn't started till 1838. This map was produced earlier in 1837, but shaft D wouldn't have been any more than 50 metres away from where those tunnels are showing us ending on this map. Now, if you follow the red line down, which is the main drive, it comes down to another shaft, which I've got marked. And that shaft there is where Gracie's sitting now. It was the 1833 shaft, and it was located, if William was walking down from shaft D to here, he'd probably have to walk 300 to 330 metres. And when he got to this shaft here, he would have turned left, as he describes in the book, and he would have travelled down there, probably 20 metres odd, and then that's where the 4 solitary cells were located, 15 metres underground. When we first visited shaft A, I suggested that this platform might have been a little bit wider than I originally thought it was. And that point there is the 15 metre mark, and after spending some more time investigating up here, I believe that the platform went all the way to where the big tree is, which wasn't here at the time, and you can see the bank here. It's terribly eroded, but it's definitely what I can see now, the platform. And on the other side of the Gracie here, you can see where the platform would have ended, where the rope is, and it travels down that way 11 metres to where that spoil dump is there. Now there is a spoil dump on the side of the rope there, and that would have been the spoil coming out of the shaft this way, because they couldn't take it down that way because the tramway was there. They couldn't take it up that big hill. They couldn't take it behind the platform, so the spoil had to go this way. So once they actually got down to the coal, this area here would have had spoil in it, but the convicts would have had to remove the spoil to clear this area to extend the platform, and that way the convicts could have been marshalled over in this area here, and the winding gear and pumping gear would have been over there. And where this dirt comes down the hill, that would not have been there at the time. This all would have been cleared where all this deadfall is, all the way back to where the far corner of the platform now exists. So where did all the water go that was being removed from shaft A? It couldn't be pumped up the hill on the left of the screen, as it would have run back down into the shaft. It couldn't be pumped towards us here where the tramway starts, and nor could it be pumped to the right of the screen, as that's where the large spoil dump was, plus that's where the convicts are being marshalled, as I said before. The only place it could have been pumped was behind the platform. At the back of the platform there is a drainage channel. It's situated about 2 metres back from the edge of the platform, and it travels along about 60 to possibly 100 metres long, and it's over half a metre deep. I did have some footage of it, but for reasons unknown Gracie deleted it. There's a little segment of it here showing you her sitting in that channel, but that was used to remove the water that was being drawn out of the shaft by the pumping device. William returned to the coal mines around 1900 as a free man. John Beattie, the historian that took down his notes, was also a photographer and took 3 photos of William at the coal mines. This is one of the photos. William is standing outside the solitary cells. He spent 4 days in there for escaping at one time, though in the book he says he spent 30 days. I don't believe that's correct. I think he's got that mixed up when he spent 30 days at another convict station in solitary. It is not known whether or not he got to visit his coal hole on that trip. So there you have it, William Thompson's coal hole at the coal mines.